You don't notice it at first.
Something comes back from a session that's close enough to accept. So you move on.
But then you come back to it, and the answer shifts. The phenomena you already live in.
5 behaviors that have been happening in your sessions all along, without a name, and therefore without the ability to work with them deliberately. Part 1 of 3.
Most people arrive with a model that worked well for every tool before this one.
Give it an instruction. It executes. The output is the product of the instruction plus capability. If something goes wrong, the instruction was imprecise, or the tool lacks the relevant capability.
That model is not wrong. It is significantly incomplete.
The output of a session is not simply the product of the final instruction. It is the product of the entire shape of the interaction. Change the shape without changing the instruction, and the output changes.
This system behaves like an environment you are working inside, not a tool you are pointing at a task.
And environments have their own behaviors. Things they do consistently, regardless of what you want them to do. Things that become visible once you stop expecting tool-like predictability and start watching for something else.
Zoom in. You ask for something simple. What comes back is close enough to accept, so you move on.
But then you come back to it. Tighten the question a little. Try again. And the answer shifts. Not wildly. Just enough to feel off.
The task hasn't changed, but it won't quite sit still.
After a while you realize, it's not giving you the answer. It's giving you a version that fits, for now. And unless you hold it there, it drifts.
Zoom in.
If you stay with it long enough, something changes. At first it wanders. Different phrasing, different angle, different answer each time. But then you start correcting it. Not everything, just the parts that don't feel right. And slowly it stops wandering.
The answers begin to line up, not identical, but consistent, like they're circling something.
You didn't tell it exactly what to say. But somehow it found the same center you were aiming for.
Zoom in. There's a moment where it looks finished, clean, structured, confident.
You read it once and it feels complete. So you stop. Most of the time, that's fine. But every now and then, you don't stop. You push one step further. And what comes back makes the first version feel shallow.
It wasn't done, it just looked like it was. Zoom in. You can push it pretty far. Deeper explanations, more steps, more detail. And for a while, it keeps up.
Then, suddenly, it doesn't. Not gradually. Not with a warning. It just stops getting deeper.
You ask for more depth, and instead of going further, it starts circling what it already said.
Like there's a floor you can't see. You only find it when you hit it.
Zoom in. 2 people sit down with the same system. Same model, same tools, same task.
They don't get the same result. Not even close. One gets something useful. The other gets something generic. And it's not obvious why. Until you start watching how they ask. What they emphasize. What they ignore. What they correct. What standard they hold the work to without ever stating it.
The system isn't just responding to the question. It's responding to the person asking it. 5 phenomena. 1 environment.
They look different on the surface. Drift is about instability. Convergence is about finding a center. The false plateau is about a tier boundary that looks like a ceiling. The depth ceiling is the actual ceiling. The observer effect is the session reflecting whoever shaped it.
Underneath, they are all versions of the same condition.
The system stabilizes around structures. What you get is determined by what has been established, not by the clarity of the final prompt, not by the capability of the model in the abstract. By the shape of what came before it.
The 5 phenomena were happening before this video. They will keep happening after it.
The difference is that they are no longer happening to you without a name.
The second part of this series goes further. Not to more phenomena, but to what becomes possible once the environment is visible.
3 moves. Available now. Part 2.
Same document, same model, the result was completely different.
And the only thing that changed was how you asked it to look.
Once the environment is visible, something becomes available that wasn't before. What you can do with this.
3 moves that become available once the session environment is visible. Not techniques, orientations. Part 2 of 3.
The first part of this series named 5 behaviors in the session environment. Things that happen regardless of what the practitioner does.
The drift field. The convergence zone. The false plateau. The depth ceiling. The observer effect. Named now, recognizable. But still happening on their own terms.
This part goes somewhere different. Not more phenomena. 3 things a practitioner can do, deliberately, that consistently shift what the session produces.
Not because the environment changes. Because the practitioner's relationship to it does.
The first move. Take the same piece of material. Same document, same data, same source.
First time, ask for a summary. It gives you what you expect. The main points, organize clearly. Nothing surprising. You read it and move on. Second time, ask it to look for contradictions instead. The whole thing feels different. Not because the material changed. Because the frame changed.
Try again, this time asking what's missing, and suddenly you are seeing things that were not visible before. Gaps that were invisible when you were looking for what was there. Same words, different meaning. The only thing that changed was how you asked it to look.
The lens is not a prompt trick. It's a deliberate choice of angle applied to the same material. And each angle activates a different region of what the system can find there.
The second move. At the beginning of a new kind of work, you have to explain everything. What you want, what matters, what to avoid. Long prompts, careful wording.
But if you stay in the conversation, if you keep working, keep correcting, keep building, something shifts. You start saying less. Shorter prompts. Fewer instructions. And somehow the responses get better, not worse.
What used to take a paragraph of setup now takes a sentence. The session has started carrying its own context.
This is not the session learning in any permanent sense. Clear the conversation and it is gone. But within the conversation, it is real. And a practitioner who knows to cultivate it works at a different speed and depth than one who restarts from scratch each time.
Priming is the deliberate accumulation of shared context. Building the conversation into a load-bearing structure so that later prompts can be aimed at substance rather than setup. The third move.
Sometimes you are not entirely sure what you are looking for. You start asking questions, pulling pieces from different places. An insight here. A fragment there. A connection that seems interesting but whose importance isn't clear yet. Individually they don't seem like much. Then you ask it to connect them.
And something forms, a pattern you didn't fully see, but somehow set up.
Something that belongs to neither of you alone. A higher order view that neither of you could have assembled separately, and that you could not have found by asking for it directly at the start.
Afterward, looking back at the session, you realize you facilitated the assembly without knowing that was what you were doing.
The questions were the right questions. The fragments were the right fragments. But the shape they made together was not visible until the assembly happened.
3 moves. They look different on the surface.
The lens is about how you read material. Priming is about how you build a conversation over time. Gem assembly is about how you gather fragments before asking for synthesis.
They share a single underlying logic. In each case, the practitioner's most important work happens before the final request.
The lens is chosen before the reading. The priming happens before the important question. The fragments are gathered before the synthesis is attempted. The request, when it arrives, is almost a formality.
Structure before request. That's the whole thing.
Most of what is called prompting skill is actually something simpler and more fundamental. The habit of shaping the field before asking it to produce. The prompts follow naturally from there.
The 5 phenomena tell you what the environment does. The 3 moves tell you what to do in response. That's already enough to work differently than most people who use these systems ever will.
But there is a third part. It goes somewhere different, not to more phenomena, and not to more moves, but to the question underneath all of them.
Why does the environment behave this way at all? What is actually happening underneath the surface of a session that makes the drift field possible, the convergence zone real, the lens effective?
The answer doesn't change what you do in practice. The moves in this part work whether or not you understand the mechanism. But understanding the mechanism changes something else, the depth from which you work.
The practitioner who understands why the lens works will eventually find lenses. The practitioner who only knows that it works will not think to try.
The third part describes the structure underneath the surface. It uses an analogy. Once the analogy has settled, the first 2 parts feel different, not wrong, but shallower than what they were pointing at.
It takes its time. It earns the reveal.
Part 3.
For a long time it feels like the system is responding to the words.
You tried different phrasing, different prompts, different styles of asking, and sometimes that works. So the hypothesis forms, better words produce better results.
Then something strange happens. 2 completely different prompts start producing the same kind of answer. Not the same words, the same structure. The deeper structure.
What is actually happening underneath the surface of every session, and why the analogy that makes it visible changes how you work from that point forward. Part 3 of 3.
The words are the outer layer. The system processes language, produces language. The practitioner interacts through language. At that level, the description is accurate. But the processing is not happening at the word level.
Words are converted, almost immediately, into positions in a geometric space, where the distance and angle between concepts encodes their relationships, their similarities, their tensions, their implications.
By the time the system is doing its actual work, the words have dissolved into structure. What remains is a web of relationships that does not care about the specific words that produced it, only about the shape they made.
This is the layer everything else in this series has been pointing at.
Zoom in. Further this time. The structural web is not flat. It has layers, each one built on the stability of the one below it.
The first layer is linguistic. Grammar, syntax, fluency. Always present. The surface that makes the system readable at all. The second is reasoning. Multi-step inference. Chain of thought. This one requires crossing a threshold. It doesn't appear gradually. It arrives when enough structure is present to support it.
The third is modeling. Hidden relationships. World state tracking. The session following the implications of what has been established, not just the surface of what was said.
And beneath all of it, the semantic core. The language agnostic layer. Where concepts from different languages, different phrasings, different surface forms all converge into the same structural region.
The practitioner working at the word level is working at the top of that diagram. The practitioner who has learned that the system is responding to structure is working somewhere further down and reaching capabilities that the surface-level worker encounters only occasionally, and usually by accident.
This space, the structural layer where the actual work happens, is built from an enormous range of human expression. Arguments, explanations, stories, attempts to say something precisely across decades of written language. The geometry of meaning that emerged from all of it.
You are learning to navigate it. There is an analogy that makes this visible in a way that descriptions of geometry don't. It comes from music.
A symphony has a surface, melody, instrumentation, rhythm, texture. All of it real. All of it present in the music. A listener experiencing it moment to moment is experiencing something genuine. Underneath all of it, underneath the melody and the instrumentation and the rhythm, there is a simpler structure. A handful of fundamental relationships between notes and tensions and resolutions that are present in every measure.
That structure organizes everything that happens at the surface. And it's the reason the symphony feels like a single coherent thing, rather than an accumulation of interesting moments.
A session with a language model has the same two layers. The surface is everything the practitioner sees, the words, the prompts, the responses. All of it real. All of it matters. Underneath it, the structural layer, the web of relationships the surface is elaborating. The system is not responding to the words of a prompt. It is responding to what the words have established in that layer.
A performer who plays a wrong note corrects it. The correction happens at the surface, because that is where performance happens.
A composer who finds that a passage isn't working does something different. They ask what the passage is supposed to be doing structurally, and whether the surface is serving that or contradicting it.
The composer's instrument is the structure, not the surface.
Most practitioners work as performers. A response isn't what they wanted. They adjust the prompt, try again, adjust again. Each adjustment at the surface gets better. But the ceiling stays where it is.
The practitioner who has understood what this series is describing works differently. When a session isn't producing what's needed, they don't first adjust the prompt. They ask what the session has established structurally.
Is what has been established coherent enough? Dense enough? Activated in the right region for the output being looked for? The answer to that question determines the next move.
3 reports, 3 videos, each one at a different altitude.
The first was recognition. 5 behaviors, named, workable. The second was action. 3 moves, available, deliberate. This third one has been somewhere different, underneath the phenomena and the moves, into the layer they were both expressions of.
The systems most people are using every day are capable of something they rarely get asked for.
Not because the capability is hidden. Not because access requires special credentials. But because most of the interaction stays at the surface, where the fluency of the output is mistaken for depth, and the plausibility of the answer is accepted where precision was available.
The depth is real. The structural layer is real. The composer's relationship to the session, attending to what is being established rather than only to what is being produced, is a real and learnable orientation.
What this series has been trying to give you is the vocabulary to get there. The names for what you are already experiencing. The moves that work with the environment rather than against it. And finally, the analogy that makes visible what the vocabulary and the moves were always pointing at. The phenomena you have named. The moves you have. The analogy you now have. The rest is practice.
The orchestra is playing. It has always been playing.
The question is whether you are listening to the notes, or to the structure the notes are elaborating.